When my boss told me I was easily replaceable after 6 years of perfect performance reviews, I simply nodded and thanked him for his honesty. What he didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for the past 18 months, anticipating exactly this conversation. The meeting had been scheduled as a routine annual review. I'd prepared the same way I always did, with detailed reports of my contributions, measurable improvements I'd implemented, and a carefully researched salary comparison showing I was 37% below market rate for my role as Senior Systems Integration Specialist. 6 years of exceptional reviews, 0 sick days, and countless weekend hours keeping our manufacturing systems running smoothly. I thought the conversation would be straightforward. Instead, I found myself sitting across from David, my department head, as he explained why my raise request was being denied. The company was tightening budgets, he said. Everyone needed to make sacrifices. And besides, my role wasn't particularly specialized. Anyone with basic IT knowledge could handle what I did. His exact words were that I should be grateful to have a job at all, considering how easily replaceable I was in today's market. I kept my expression neutral as he spoke. David had been promoted to department head 8 months earlier, despite having no technical background. His previous role had been in sales, where he'd apparently impressed upper management with his cost-cutting initiatives. He'd made it clear from day one that he viewed the technical staff as necessary expenses rather than valuable assets. What David didn't understand was that our manufacturing facility ran on a complex integration of legacy systems that I'd spent 6 years learning, documenting, and continuously optimizing. The previous specialist had left abruptly, providing only 2 days of handover before disappearing into retirement. I'd inherited a maze of undocumented processes, jury-rigged connections, and critical systems held together by institutional knowledge that existed nowhere but in his head. Over the following weeks, I'd systematically reverse-engineered every connection, documented every process, and created detailed flowcharts of how our 37 different systems communicated with each other. The manufacturing line hadn't experienced a single systems-related shutdown in 4 years. Our production efficiency had improved by 23%. Maintenance costs had dropped by 41%, but David saw only salary expenses and budget line items. After the meeting, I returned to my desk and opened the folder I'd been maintaining since David's promotion. Inside were copies of every system document I'd created, every process improvement I'd implemented, and detailed records of every problem I'd solved. More importantly, it contained my analysis of what would happen if those systems lost their primary support specialist. That evening, I updated my resume and began reaching out to contacts in the industry. Not frantically, not desperately, methodically. I'd learned long ago that the best time to look for a new job is when you don't desperately need one. The first response came within 3 days. A former colleague had moved to a competing manufacturing company and remembered my reputation for solving impossible integration problems. They were expanding their operations and needed someone who could design and implement complex system architectures from the ground up. The salary they mentioned was 68% higher than my current compensation. I scheduled the interview for the following week. While waiting, I continued my normal responsibilities without any change in performance or attitude. David had made his position clear, and I saw no benefit in emotional responses or confrontational behavior. Instead, I began a subtle process of knowledge transition. For 6 years, I'd maintained detailed documentation of our systems, but I'd never been asked to share it broadly. The documentation existed in my personal directories, organized according to my own logical framework. I began moving these files to a shared network location, but I organized them according to the official corporate file structure rather than my intuitive system. Anyone looking for information about the packaging line integration would find a folder labeled Manufacturing Systems Integration Projects, Packaging Division Subsystem, Documentation Archive. Inside that folder would be subfolders for each year, then subfolders for each month, then subfolders for each type of documentation. The actual troubleshooting guide that could prevent a complete production shutdown would be buried 4 levels deep in a folder called Miscellaneous Technical Reference Materials Secondary Systems. Technically, everything was properly documented and accessible. Practically, finding the right information during a crisis would require either intimate knowledge of my filing system or hours of searching. The interview went exceptionally well. The hiring manager understood exactly what I did and why it was valuable. She'd worked in manufacturing for 15 years and had seen what happened when companies undervalued their technical specialists. We discussed system integration challenges, talked through complex scenarios I'd handled, and reviewed examples of the efficiency improvements I'd implemented. They offered me the position 2 days later. The salary was even higher than initially mentioned, once they understood the full scope of my expertise. They also offered 4 weeks of vacation, comprehensive health benefits, and a professional development budget that was larger than my current annual raise would have been. I accepted immediately. The next step was composing my resignation letter. I kept it brief and professional. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. No complaints, no explanations of my reasons for leaving. Just a simple statement that I was pursuing other opportunities and would ensure a smooth transition of my responsibilities. I submitted the letter on a Tuesday morning and requested a meeting with David to discuss the transition process. His reaction was predictable. Surprise followed quickly by dismissive confidence. He mentioned that they'd been planning to restructure the department anyway, possibly eliminating my position entirely. This was actually convenient timing. They could redistribute my responsibilities among the existing IT staff and save the salary expense entirely. I offered to spend my remaining 2 weeks creating detailed handover documentation and training materials. David declined, saying that wouldn't be necessary. The systems were straightforward enough that anyone could figure them out. Besides, they had documentation for everything important. I didn't disagree with him. My last day was a Friday. I cleaned out my desk, returned my access badges, and completed the standard exit interview with HR. The interviewer asked routine questions about my experience with the company, whether I felt my skills had been properly utilized, and if there was anything that could have prevented my departure. I answered honestly but diplomatically. The company had provided valuable learning opportunities. I'd enjoyed working with the technical systems. My departure was simply a matter of career advancement. These things happen. I started my new position the following Monday. The transition was seamless. My new employer had structured the onboarding process professionally, with proper introductions to key stakeholders, comprehensive overviews of their systems architecture, and clear expectations for my first 90 days. Meanwhile, my former workplace was discovering what easily replaceable actually meant. The first issue occurred on Wednesday of my second week away. The packaging line integration system, which connected our inventory management database to the automated packaging equipment, began generating error messages. The line operators followed standard protocol and contacted IT support. The junior technician who responded had basic networking knowledge but had never worked with the specific middleware that managed the database connections. He spent 2 hours reviewing the error logs, searching through documentation, and attempting standard troubleshooting procedures. The packaging line remained down. Eventually, he escalated the issue to the senior IT specialist, who had 15 years of experience with network infrastructure, but limited knowledge of manufacturing systems integration. She identified that the error was occurring in the communication layer between the inventory database and the packaging control system, but couldn't determine why the connection was failing. The packaging line remained down for 6 hours before they found a temporary workaround that required manual data entry for each packaging run. Production efficiency dropped by 43%. David was not pleased with the resolution time, but he attributed the problem to a random system glitch. These things happen with complex technology. The important thing was that they'd solved it without needing to bring in expensive external consultants. The second issue occurred the following week. The quality control integration system, which automatically logged production metrics and generated compliance reports, began producing corrupted data files. The corrupted files caused the automated reporting system to crash, which meant the daily production reports weren't generated. This time, the IT team was more prepared. They immediately began searching through the documentation I'd left behind, looking for information about the quality control integration. They found the folder labeled Manufacturing Systems Integration Projects, Quality Control Division Subsystem Documentation Archive. Inside the folder, they found subfolders organized by year and month. They located recent documentation and began reviewing the technical specifications for the quality control integration. The documentation was thorough and accurate, but it was written at a high technical level, assuming familiarity with the underlying system architecture. After 8 hours of analysis, they determined that the integration was failing because of a communication protocol mismatch between the quality control sensors and the data logging system. The documentation explained how the communication protocol worked, but it didn't explain how to reconfigure it when it stopped working. The quality control integration remained offline for 2 days. During that time, all quality metrics had to be recorded manually and compiled into reports by hand. The compliance department worked overtime to ensure they met regulatory reporting requirements. David began asking questions about why these systems were so complicated and whether they really needed such complex integration. The IT team explained that the integration was what allowed their automated processes to function efficiently, but they weren't sure how to simplify it without reducing functionality. By the end of my third week away, I'd heard from several former colleagues who were dealing with increasingly complex system issues. Word was spreading through the facility that the IT department was struggling to maintain the automated systems that kept production running smoothly. The manufacturing line supervisors were frustrated with frequent minor outages that required manual workarounds. The quality control team was spending additional hours each day compiling data that had previously been generated automatically. The maintenance department was dealing with equipment issues that weren't being properly logged or tracked. David called an all-hands meeting to address concerns about system reliability. He assured everyone that the IT team was working diligently to resolve the temporary issues they were experiencing. The problems were primarily related to aging technology that needed to be updated anyway. This was actually an opportunity to modernize their systems and reduce complexity. He announced that they were bringing in a consulting firm to evaluate their current system architecture and recommend improvements. The consultants would help them implement more standardized, user-friendly systems that wouldn't require such specialized expertise to maintain. The consulting firm arrived during my fourth week away. They spent 3 days interviewing staff, reviewing documentation, and analyzing the current system configuration. Their preliminary assessment was that the manufacturing facility had an unusually complex but highly effective integration architecture that had been optimized over several years to maximize efficiency and minimize downtime. The consultants noted that the documentation was comprehensive and technically accurate, but that the systems required deep institutional knowledge to maintain effectively. They recommended either hiring a specialist with extensive experience in similar integration environments or investing in 6 to 8 months of intensive training for existing staff. The cost estimate for their recommended solution was substantial. Hiring an experienced specialist would cost significantly more than my previous salary, given the current market demand for integration expertise. Training existing staff would require taking them offline for extended periods, reducing IT support capacity during the training period. David requested a third option. Could they simplify the integration architecture to make it more manageable with existing staff? The consultant said yes, but warned that simplification would likely reduce the automation that was currently driving their efficiency improvements. They estimated that production efficiency would decrease by 15 to 20% during the transition period, with additional ongoing efficiency losses of 8 to 12% compared to current performance. While David was reviewing options with the consulting firm, the manufacturing facility experienced its first major system failure since my departure. The inventory management integration, which automatically tracked raw materials consumption and triggered reordering when supplies reached predetermined thresholds, stopped communicating with the procurement system. The failure wasn't immediately obvious because the individual systems continued functioning normally. The inventory database was still tracking material usage. The procurement system was still capable of processing orders, but the automated connection between them had failed, which meant that reorder triggers weren't being sent. The problem wasn't discovered until the packaging line ran out of a critical raw material that should have been automatically reordered 3 days earlier. Production stopped completely while they arranged emergency material deliveries and manually reconciled the inventory tracking system. The emergency material delivery cost 4 times the normal price due to expedited shipping requirements. The production shutdown cost approximately $8,000 in lost revenue per hour. The manual inventory reconciliation required 12 hours of overtime work from the procurement and inventory management teams. Total cost of the incident exceeded $43,000. David was forced to explain the situation to upper management. He emphasized that this was an isolated incident caused by an aging system that they were already planning to replace. The consulting firm was developing a comprehensive solution that would prevent future problems. Upper management was not entirely satisfied with this explanation. They wanted to understand why a system that had been running reliably for years was suddenly experiencing frequent failures. David explained that the previous specialists had implemented overly complex solutions that were inherently unstable. The current problems were actually revealing weaknesses that had always existed but had been temporarily masked. This explanation was technically accurate. The integration systems were complex, and they did require specialized knowledge to maintain. What David didn't mention was that the complexity existed for good reasons, and that the specialized knowledge had been preventing exactly these types of expensive failures. During my 6th week away, I received a phone call from Sarah, who worked in the quality control department. Sarah and I had collaborated on several projects over the years, and she'd always been supportive of the technical improvements I'd implemented. She was calling to ask if I might be available for some consulting work. The manufacturing facility was experiencing ongoing issues with their automated systems, and management was considering hiring external specialists to provide temporary support while they developed a long-term solution. Sarah thought they might be interested in bringing me back as a consultant, at least for a few weeks, to help stabilize the systems. I explained that I was fully committed to my new position and wasn't available for outside consulting work. However, I offered to recommend other qualified specialists who might be able to help them. Sarah thanked me for the referral and mentioned that she hoped my new job was working out well. It was working out exceptionally well. My new employer had already asked me to lead a major system integration project that would expand their manufacturing capacity by 30%. The project involved exactly the type of complex problem-solving that I enjoyed, with full management support and adequate resources to implement proper solutions. The contrast with my previous environment was remarkable. When I identified potential improvements or suggested new approaches, my recommendations were taken seriously and evaluated on their technical merits. When I explained why certain systems needed to be designed in specific ways, management trusted my expertise rather than questioning whether the complexity was really necessary. By my 7th week away, the consulting firm had completed their analysis and presented their final recommendations to David and upper management. They'd identified 3 possible approaches for resolving the ongoing system reliability issues. Option 1 was to hire an experienced systems integration specialist who could maintain the current architecture while implementing additional stability improvements. This specialist would need to have specific experience with the types of legacy systems and integration challenges present at the facility. The consulting firm estimated this would cost approximately 40% more than my previous salary, based on current market rates for specialists with the required expertise. Option 2 was to invest in comprehensive training for existing IT staff, supplemented by ongoing consulting support during the transition period. This approach would take 8 to 12 months to fully implement and would cost approximately twice my previous annual salary in training and consulting fees. There was also risk that trained staff members might leave for higher-paying positions once they'd acquired specialized skills. Option 3 was to redesign the integration architecture to reduce complexity, accepting the associated efficiency losses in exchange for easier maintenance. This approach would require the largest upfront investment, approximately 4 times my previous annual salary, and would permanently reduce manufacturing efficiency by 8 to 12%. David presented these options to upper management, emphasizing that option 3 would provide the most long-term stability by reducing their dependence on specialized technical knowledge. He argued that the efficiency losses would be offset by reduced IT support costs and greater system reliability. Upper management was less convinced. The efficiency improvements I'd implemented over 6 years had been contributing approximately $200,000 annually in cost savings and productivity gains. An 8% reduction in efficiency would cost them roughly $16,000 per month, or nearly $200,000 per year. They asked David to explain again why the previous systems integration specialist had been considered easily replaceable if replacing him was now going to cost so much money and potentially reduce their operational efficiency. David's explanation was that the previous specialist had deliberately overcomplicated the systems to make himself indispensable. A properly designed integration architecture shouldn't require such specialized knowledge to maintain. The current problems were actually the result of poor initial design choices that were now being corrected. This explanation contained elements of truth. Complex systems do require specialized knowledge to maintain effectively, and it's always possible to reduce complexity by accepting reduced functionality. But the characterization of the design choices as deliberately obfuscated was inaccurate. The integration architecture had evolved over 6 years to optimize efficiency, reliability, and maintainability within the constraints of the existing legacy systems. Each design decision had been made to solve specific problems or improve specific aspects of performance. The complexity was a result of integrating 37 different systems that had been designed by different vendors over a 15-year period. While upper management was debating these options, the manufacturing facility experienced another significant system failure. The preventive maintenance scheduling system, which automatically generated work orders based on equipment usage patterns and maintenance histories, began generating incorrect schedules. The problem wasn't immediately obvious because the work orders were still being generated on schedule. However, the system was calculating maintenance intervals based on corrupted data, which meant that some equipment was being over-maintained while other equipment was being under-maintained. The issue was discovered when a critical piece of packaging equipment failed unexpectedly, despite having been serviced according to the automated schedule. Investigation revealed that the equipment had been receiving the wrong type of maintenance at incorrect intervals for nearly 3 weeks. The equipment failure shut down the packaging line for 18 hours, while replacement parts were located and installed. The investigation into the maintenance scheduling system revealed that the data corruption was occurring in the integration layer between the equipment monitoring system and the maintenance database. This was exactly the type of problem that I'd been preventing through routine monitoring and proactive maintenance of the integration connections. The system hadn't failed because it was poorly designed. It had failed because it wasn't receiving the specialized attention it required to function reliably. The cost of this incident exceeded $70,000 when accounting for lost production, emergency parts procurement, overtime labor, and expedited shipping charges. Upper management scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss the ongoing system reliability issues. They wanted a comprehensive explanation of why systems that had been running smoothly were now failing regularly, and they wanted a definitive timeline for resolving the problems. David presented the consulting firm's recommendations again, but this time upper management focused on option 1. They wanted to know exactly what kind of specialists they needed to hire and how quickly they could find someone with the required qualifications. The consulting firm explained that they were looking for someone with specific experience in manufacturing systems integration, particularly involving legacy systems and complex database connections. The ideal candidate would have a track record of maintaining similar environments and implementing efficiency improvements. They estimated it would take 6 to 8 weeks to identify and hire a qualified specialist. Upper management asked whether they knew of any candidates who were immediately available. The consulting firm mentioned that specialists with the required experience were typically employed and would need time to transition from their current positions. However, they offered to accelerate their search process and provide temporary consulting support to stabilize the most critical systems. The temporary consulting support would cost approximately $3,000 per day, with no guarantee of how long it would be required. During my 8th week away, I learned from Sarah that upper management had approved hiring a new systems integration specialist at a significantly higher salary than I'd been earning. They'd also approved daily consulting fees to provide interim support while they searched for the right candidate. The consulting firm had interviewed several potential candidates, but hadn't found anyone with the specific combination of experience and availability they needed. Most qualified specialists were employed in similar roles and weren't actively looking for new positions. Meanwhile, the daily consulting fees were accumulating rapidly. The consultant was competent and experienced, but needed time to understand the specific systems and integration approaches that had been implemented at the facility. Each day of analysis and familiarization was costing $3,000. Sarah mentioned that several people had asked whether I might be interested in returning, either as an employee or as a consultant. The new position would offer substantially higher compensation and would come with explicit management support for technical decision-making. I thanked Sarah for thinking of me, but explained that I was committed to my current role. My new employer was investing in my professional development and had given me responsibility for major projects that would advance my career significantly. Returning to my previous workplace wouldn't serve my long-term professional interests. This was entirely true. My new position was everything I'd hoped for when I began my job search. But there was also satisfaction in knowing that my previous employer was discovering the true cost of considering me easily replaceable. By my 10th week away, the manufacturing facility had spent over $60,000 on consulting fees and had experienced 3 more significant system failures. The total cost of production disruptions, emergency repairs, and manual workarounds had exceeded $150,000. Upper management was growing increasingly frustrated with the situation. They'd been told that the problems were temporary and would be resolved quickly, but the issues seemed to be getting worse rather than better. They demanded an explanation from David about why the transition was proving so difficult. David's explanation was that the previous systems integration work had been more extensive than initially understood. The consultant was discovering hidden dependencies in undocumented connections that were complicating the stabilization process. It was taking longer than expected to fully understand how all the systems were interconnected. This explanation was accurate. The integration architecture was extensive and sophisticated, but the characterization of the connections as hidden or undocumented was misleading. The documentation existed and was comprehensive, but it required technical expertise to interpret and apply effectively. The consultant was essentially reverse engineering work that I'd already documented, but the documentation was organized according to my understanding of the system relationships. Someone without that background knowledge had to rebuild the same understanding from scratch, which was time-consuming and expensive. Upper management asked for a definitive timeline for resolving the situation. David consulted with the consulting firm and reported that they needed another 4 to 6 weeks to complete the stabilization process, assuming no additional major system failures occurred during that period. The estimated total cost for consulting fees, lost production, and emergency repairs was approaching $250,000. This was more than 3 times my previous annual salary. Upper management was not pleased with these numbers. They began asking pointed questions about whether the original decision to let me go had been properly evaluated. They wanted to understand why a position that had been considered non-essential was now requiring such expensive external support to maintain. David explained that the situation was complicated by the fact that the previous specialist had left during a particularly challenging period. If the transition had been managed more gradually, with proper knowledge transfer and overlap training, the cost would have been much lower. This explanation implied that I'd been uncooperative during the transition process. But the reality was that David had declined my offer to provide detailed handover documentation and training. He'd specifically told me that such preparation wasn't necessary because the systems were straightforward enough for anyone to understand. During my 11th week away, the situation reached a crisis point. The integration system that managed raw material inventory across multiple production lines failed completely, corrupting the central inventory database and preventing any automated material tracking. The failure occurred during the night shift, when minimal IT support was available. By morning, 3 production lines had shut down due to apparent material shortages that may or may not have been accurate. The inventory database was showing impossible values, like negative quantities of materials that were physically present in the warehouse. The consulting firm was called in for emergency support, but even their experienced specialists needed 8 hours to understand the scope of the database corruption and begin developing a recovery plan. The recovery process required rebuilding inventory data from physical counts and manual reconciliation with procurement records. All production lines remained shut down for 36 hours while the inventory system was rebuilt. The cost of this single incident exceeded $120,000 in lost production, overtime labor, and emergency consulting fees. Upper management demanded an immediate meeting with David to discuss the ongoing crisis. They wanted to know how a system that had been running reliably for years could fail so catastrophically, and they wanted to know what was being done to prevent similar failures in the future. David's explanation was that the inventory integration system had been inherently unstable due to its complex design. The failure was actually fortunate because it revealed critical vulnerabilities that could have caused even worse problems later. The rebuild process was an opportunity to implement a more robust and maintainable solution. Upper management was no longer satisfied with explanations about complex systems and inherent instability. They wanted to know specifically what had changed between the period when these systems were running reliably and the current period of frequent failures. The only significant change was my departure 11 weeks earlier. David acknowledged that the timing was coincidental, but emphasized that the current problems were revealing issues that had always existed. The previous specialist had been applying temporary fixes that masked underlying problems rather than implementing proper solutions. Upper management asked to review my personnel file and performance history. They wanted to understand what specific qualifications and experience I'd brought to the role, and whether those qualifications were being properly considered in their search for a replacement. My file showed 6 years of exceptional performance reviews, 0 system-related production outages during my tenure, and documented efficiency improvements totaling over $1 million in cost savings and productivity gains. My qualifications included specialized training in systems integration, extensive experience with the specific technologies used at the facility, and a track record of solving complex technical problems. The replacement candidates being considered had general IT experience, but lacked the specific systems integration expertise and manufacturing environment knowledge that my role required. Upper management asked David to explain why these qualifications had been considered easily replaceable when the evidence suggested they were quite specialized and valuable. David's response was that any good IT professional should be able to learn the necessary skills with adequate training and support. The previous specialist hadn't possessed any unique abilities that couldn't be developed by other qualified technicians. This statement was both true and misleading. Any competent IT professional could theoretically learn systems integration skills with sufficient time and training, but developing expertise in complex manufacturing integration environments typically required several years of hands-on experience, and that experience needed to be gained while the systems continued operating reliably. The consulting firm had provided a more realistic assessment. They'd estimated that training existing staff to maintain the integration architecture would take 8 to 12 months and would require ongoing consulting support during the learning period. Even then, the newly trained staff would lack the institutional knowledge and experience that came from years of working with the specific systems and business processes. By my 12th week away, upper management had made a decision. They were prepared to offer me a position to return to the company as Senior Systems Integration Manager, with a 47% salary increase, expanded authority over technical decision-making, and a commitment to invest in additional technical staff to support the integration architecture. Sarah called to ask if I would be interested in discussing the opportunity. The offer was substantially more than what I'd originally requested in my raise proposal, and it came with recognition of the value I'd been providing to the organization. I thanked Sarah for reaching out and asked her to express my appreciation to management for reconsidering my contributions. However, I explained that I was fully committed to my current role and wouldn't be interested in returning. This was a professional decision based on multiple factors. My new employer had invested significant resources in my onboarding and training, and I had responsibilities for major projects that were important to their business success. Leaving after only 3 months would damage my professional reputation and could impact my long-term career prospects. More importantly, the offer to return represented acknowledgement of my value only after my absence had caused expensive problems. While the increased compensation was substantial, it reflected what my contributions had been worth all along, not additional value I would bring to the organization. My previous employer had made it clear that they viewed technical staff as replaceable expenses rather than valuable assets. Even if management had changed their perspective, the organizational culture that had led to that viewpoint was likely to persist. Sarah understood my decision and mentioned that management was disappointed, but not surprised. They were proceeding with their search for a qualified replacement and had budgeted significantly more resources for both salary and ongoing technical support. The consulting firm had advised them that finding a specialist with the required qualifications could take several more months, particularly given the current market demand for integration expertise. They were prepared to continue providing temporary consulting support while expanding their search to include candidates who might be willing to relocate. Meanwhile, the manufacturing facility continued experiencing periodic system issues that required expensive consulting support to resolve. The total cost of system failures, consulting fees, and lost production had exceeded $400,000, with additional ongoing costs expected until a permanent specialist was hired and fully trained. By my 16th week away, I learned that my former employer had finally hired a replacement. The new specialist had 8 years of experience in manufacturing systems integration and had previously worked in similar environments with comparable technical challenges. The hiring process had taken 4 months and had required offering a salary that was 62% higher than what I'd been earning. The company had also agreed to provide additional technical staff support, upgraded development tools, and a professional development budget. The new specialist was competent and experienced, but still needed several weeks to become familiar with the specific systems and processes at the facility. During this transition period, consulting support continued to be required for complex issues. Even after the new specialist was fully operational, the total cost of replacing me exceeded $700,000 when accounting for lost production, consulting fees, hiring costs, and the higher salary requirements for equivalent expertise. This represented a return on investment that upper management found difficult to ignore. The efficiency improvements I'd implemented over 6 years had been saving the company approximately $200,000 annually. The cost of replacing me was equivalent to 3.5 years of those savings. Sarah mentioned that David's position had been restructured following the extended crisis with the systems integration issues. While he remained with the company, he was no longer responsible for managing technical staff or making decisions about IT investments. Upper management had concluded that technical roles required different evaluation criteria than other positions, and that specialized expertise needed to be recognized and valued appropriately to prevent similar disruptions in the future. The experience had been educational for everyone involved, though expensive for the organization. For me, the situation had validated my decision to document everything carefully and to respond strategically rather than emotionally when faced with professional challenges. My reputation in the industry had been enhanced by word of mouth about how my former employer had struggled after my departure. My new position continued to provide excellent opportunities for professional growth and technical challenges. The system integration project I was leading had been highly successful, and I'd been asked to take on additional responsibilities for expanding the company's automation capabilities. The contrast between my current and previous work environments remained striking. When I proposed technical solutions or identified potential improvements, my recommendations were evaluated based on their technical merits and potential business impact. Management understood that complex systems required specialized expertise and trusted my professional judgment. More importantly, they recognized that technical expertise represented an investment in the organization's capabilities rather than just an operational expense. This perspective made it possible to implement proper solutions rather than just temporary fixes, which resulted in better long-term reliability and efficiency. Looking back on the entire experience, I'm satisfied with how I handled a difficult professional situation. I documented my contributions carefully, responded to unfair treatment with strategic planning rather than emotional reactions, and made career decisions based on long-term professional interests rather than short-term frustrations. The outcome demonstrated that specialized expertise has measurable value, even when that value isn't immediately obvious to managers who lack technical backgrounds. Organizations that fail to recognize and retain essential capabilities inevitably discover the true cost of replacement, though often at considerable expense. My former colleagues occasionally update me on developments at the manufacturing facility. The new systems integration specialist has implemented several improvements and has established better documentation practices to prevent knowledge concentration issues. Production efficiency has returned to previous levels, and system reliability has stabilized. The total cost of the transition period became a case study within the company for evaluating the true value of specialized roles and the importance of proper succession planning. Management now conducts more thorough analyses before making decisions about technical positions, particularly those involving complex systems or institutional knowledge. David's experience also became instructive for other managers in the organization. The assumption that technical roles can be easily replaced without understanding the specific expertise involved proved to be costly and disruptive. Future restructuring decisions now include input from senior technical staff to assess potential risks and transition requirements. For my part, I've continued advancing in my career with increased recognition of my expertise and contributions. The experience reinforced the importance of maintaining comprehensive documentation, building professional networks, and making strategic career decisions based on long-term value rather than immediate circumstances. The situation also highlighted how organizational culture affects the retention of valuable employees. Companies that view technical staff as expenses rather than assets create environments where talented people naturally seek opportunities elsewhere. Those that recognize and invest in specialized expertise tend to retain their best performers and avoid costly disruptions. The manufacturing industry has evolved to become increasingly dependent on complex technical systems and integration solutions. Organizations that understand this trend and properly value technical expertise position themselves for success. Those that continue viewing technology roles as easily replaceable face ongoing challenges in maintaining competitive operations. My current employer has benefited from this understanding. They've invested in building strong technical teams, providing proper resources for complex projects, and creating career advancement opportunities for specialists. This approach has resulted in high retention rates, successful project outcomes, and continuous improvement in operational efficiency. The contrast with my former employer's approach remains instructive. Short-term cost savings achieved by undervaluing essential expertise typically result in much higher long-term costs when that expertise needs to be replaced. The most successful organizations recognize this dynamic and structure their human resource strategies accordingly. Professional development and career satisfaction come from working in environments that value expertise and provide opportunities for meaningful contributions. My experience has reinforced the importance of seeking positions where technical skills are properly appreciated and where professional growth is actively supported. The story also illustrates the value of maintaining professional relationships and industry connections. The opportunity that led to my current position came through a former colleague who understood my capabilities and recommended me for a role that matched my expertise. Professional networks often provide the best pathways for career advancement. Documentation and preparation proved essential for managing the transition successfully. Having comprehensive records of my contributions, detailed system documentation, and a clear understanding of my professional value made it possible to respond strategically when faced with an unfair situation. The emotional discipline required to respond professionally rather than reactively was challenging but ultimately beneficial. Maintaining focus on long-term professional goals rather than short-term frustrations led to better outcomes for my career and provided valuable lessons about organizational dynamics. The experience has informed my approach to subsequent professional challenges. When faced with difficult situations, I focus on gathering accurate information, understanding all available options, and making decisions based on strategic considerations rather than immediate emotional responses. Management decisions about technical roles require understanding both the visible aspects of those roles and the less obvious expertise that may not be apparent to non-technical observers. The most costly mistakes often involve underestimating the value of specialized knowledge and institutional expertise. Organizations benefit from creating systems that capture and preserve essential knowledge rather than allowing it to be concentrated in individual employees. However, this requires recognizing that knowledge transfer and documentation are substantial undertakings that require proper time and resources to complete effectively. The manufacturing facility where I previously worked has implemented several improvements based on lessons learned from their experience. They now conduct thorough succession planning for technical roles, maintain better documentation practices, and provide more comprehensive training for replacement staff. These improvements came at significant cost, but they've resulted in more stable operations and better retention of technical staff. The organization has also developed a better understanding of how technical expertise contributes to their competitive advantages in manufacturing efficiency and system reliability. My current role continues to provide opportunities for professional growth and technical challenges that utilize my expertise effectively. The system integration projects I've completed have resulted in substantial efficiency improvements and have established my reputation as a specialist in complex manufacturing automation. The experience of being undervalued and then having that value demonstrated through my absence has been professionally validating. It confirmed that specialized expertise has measurable impact on organizational performance, even when that impact isn't immediately obvious to all stakeholders. Looking forward, I remain focused on continuing to develop my technical capabilities while building leadership skills that will support career advancement. The combination of technical expertise and strategic thinking that served me well during this challenging period continues to be valuable in my current role. The manufacturing industry's increasing reliance on complex technical systems creates ongoing opportunities for specialists who can design, implement, and maintain sophisticated integration solutions. Organizations that recognize this trend and invest appropriately in technical expertise position themselves for continued success. Professional satisfaction comes from working in environments where contributions are valued and where challenging problems can be solved with proper resources and support. My current position provides both of these elements, which makes the contrast with my previous experience even more apparent. The story demonstrates that professional challenges, while difficult when they occur, can lead to better opportunities and career advancement when handled strategically. The key is maintaining focus on long-term professional goals rather than allowing short-term frustrations to drive decision-making. Ultimately, the experience reinforced my belief that expertise has intrinsic value that will be recognized by organizations sophisticated enough to understand its importance. The challenge is finding those organizations and positioning yourself to take advantage of opportunities when they arise. The lessons learned from this experience continue to inform my professional approach and have contributed to continued success in my career. Technical expertise, strategic thinking, and professional discipline remain the foundation for navigating complex workplace challenges and achieving long-term career objectives.